Alright guys, today I'll be taking a upper intake off a 3.0 liter dock, and they're a little bit different in the Fusions, the Zephyrs, Milans. They're all the same, but they're a little bit different than the other 3.0 docks that are on, let's say the Escape or the old Tauruses, stuff like that. It's a little bit different setup with the EGRs and got the map sensor, different inputs and all that. So we'll be going through this one. This is a very important step, one of the first steps in getting to those back spark plugs to change them out on these engines. So this is a very important step to know how to do right, so when you get done with your spark plug job, you have a smooth running engine. There's no additional problems that you made by pulling this intake off. The Lincolns have the cover, it just pops off, kind of pushes on there. We're going to start by getting some of these harnesses off here. They should all be pretty close. I know the models will be pretty close to be the same, but the different model years, maybe a wire harness has changed a bit, and that's about it. So we're going to pull our harness retainer back here for the map sensor. Disconnect the map sensor. You can see it right there probably. Right there, the retainer. Get that out of the way, so we're not pinching it later. We're going to pull this vent line off, and we got to pull the 8mm bolt for it, so we can get it loose and out of the way. And we're going to pull our intake snorkel here next. Get this whole line out of the way. And then, of course, the 8mm screw for the clamp here. Loosen it. Mass airflow sensor connector. And then we'll take this off as an assembly. Just wiggle it off of here. Throttle body connector, red tang back, and then we push in the black tang. At this point, we want to clean this area off with an air hose before you start taking off any more vacuum lines or large ports. Now this whole hose area here and over here is a real pain to separate, so I would just leave this here, because this goes down to the booster, leave all this connected over here, and just disconnect right here, this vacuum line. Got it loosened. Now we should be able to just push it off of here with that big old cat claw like that. Gets it on both sides. And you see how easy I just pushed off of there, and that can just stay back here by the firewall. Now they have you loosening the big nut on here for the EGR valve, for the pipe that connects to it. That's a real pain. So what I do is I just take these two 10mm bolts, you'll see them right here. There's two of them that bolt the EGR valve to the actual intake. I take those off, this whole thing stays in place, and this comes out of the way. And then you can take both your bolts and put them right here in the same area. At this point, we can start loosening the bolts that hold the actual intake down, and then we could start getting to these other connections that are harder to get to with much more ease at that point. These are 8mm. Just jump around and loosen them. So we loosen it evenly. As best we can. There is no specific detorque sequence, but I like to do it no matter what. You can try to pick up on it a little bit like that. It's going to be stuck like that, especially if you got age by the time you're, getting into here for your spark plugs and all that stuff, you're going to have some age and they're going to stick. So give it a little good tug like that. You can start lifting it up, and then we can look back here. Now at this point there's a big hose on here for the PCV system, and it's got a quick release on the actual valve cover itself. I'll show it to you in a second here. Alright, right here is that PCV line, a thick PCV line, and it just quick connects into the PCV valve here on the back bank. And you can see there's just a little green tang right here. And you just press on it and then pull, and it'll release right off of there and leave the other side connected to the intake. What you're going to do is pick up the intake like I have it, and you're going to leave all these coolant lines connected down here. Once to the throttle body and everything, all these lines, because these are going to be brittle lines that are going to be really stuck on there from time, heat cycles. You don't want to mess with all these lines, not to mention the coolant leaks. So leave them all on there, flip it up like this, it won't stress the lines, it'll be up and out of your way, so you can work on your valve cover gaskets or tune-up, whichever. And all you got to do is hook it in one of these holes right here. Don't hook it into the intake here. Hook it into one of these holes. There we go. One of them. And let's put a bungee on there and hook it onto your hood support here. And it'll go around it without damaging it also, and it'll hold it right out of the way for you. Now once the intake's up and out of the way, first things first, plug these ports up. Really don't want anything going down in there. Won't be looking. Use a little socket down there. It'll be a real pain from there on out. I like to drape them over just like this. If you gotta do two of them, fine. But this way, you pick it up, you're definitely pulling all the rags out. You're not leaving any stuff way down into the intake port by accident. In case you were rushing or whatever. Rushing or not, you couldn't forget these. Alright, get yourself a pick or something like this, and we can start pulling these gaskets out of here. That's another nice thing. With it being propped up like this, it holds it for us while we're working on it. Get these gaskets out, cleaning it. Some of these be really stuck in here. And then I soak a rag and brake clean, and I clean the area where they go. And then your new ones just push in. There's no locating tabs on these. And they're all individual. Just make sure they're pushed down all the way. All the way around just like that. At this point, if you haven't already, make sure that you, well, first off, get your rags out of there. And then do a good cleaning of the actual sealing surface with some brake clean also. And then I think we'll be ready to lower this intake back down. Now the first thing we're going to have to do is get this PCV line on before you fully push it back to the firewall. So that's the biggest thing we got to do, and that luckily just clips on. It's a tight fit around this harness right here. Okay, let's make sure that PCV line is fully clipped on till it clicks. There we go. Alright. Now get your intake lined up and start threading the bolts by hand before you do any other connections. Just snug them up. Alright, before we go any further, get the throttle body connector back on until it clips in, then your red locking tab. Same thing with your map sensor over here until it clicks. We're going to pick up this vacuum line and we're going to slip it onto here and then move the clamp over and lock that down also. Push this wire retainer back in. Okay. At this point we can either replace the EGR gasket or just start bolting on the EGR. I replace them, but it's not absolutely necessary. They will reseal with the original on there just fine. So it's up to you. And that's where your two 10mm bolts come back in. We're going to thread these in and line it up now before we ever tighten the intake down. Then tighten your EGR bolts back up. The EGR bolts are 216 inch-pounds. At this point we can put the air intake snorkel back on. Make sure a little notch right here is on the other side of this line right here on the throttle body. You'll see how it lines up. And then most important, make sure this air box hooks into the lower air box with both of these tangs right here fully. It's a little bit of work to do it, but if you don't do it, you're going to have a lot of different codes for the tax system here. Now that aligned, MAF sensor, clip it in, lock it down. I did have my PCV fresh air inlet hose here. Pushes right on, pushes right on. And we're going to tighten this clamp before we forget, like that. And then your little 8mm bolt right here to support this line. Alright, last things last, we're going to torque the intake down. We're going to torque it down to 90 inch-pounds, and I'll be putting a link to the picture of the sequence, or you can just follow along also as I torque through these. That's number 1. This is number 2. Back over here for number 3. It's a little harder to see inside there. And then back up here to this one for 4. Right here for 5. 6. And 7. And finally 8. Okay. As a quick post check, just make sure that all your connections are tight, all your bolts are fully bolted down, and we didn't forget anything before we go trying to start the engine. Just give it a good look over all the things we touched. And then of course in the Lincolns, don't forget your fancy engine appearance cover. Okay, so I hope this has helped some that are a little perplexed by the amount of stuff attached to this engine. It looks a little more complicated than it really is. This is actually one of the easier intakes, upper intakes to remove.